Coming up on Philosophy Talk.
Greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works.
Money and morality.
On the one hand, subprime lending is considered an abhorrent practice where you're taking advantage of poor people. In another case, subprime lending, also called microfinance, won somebody a Nobel Prize.
Neither a borrower nor a lender be.
The idea that you get to loan money for interest, I don't think is an inherently immoral thing.
Don't corporations have special moral responsibilities?
Yeah, it's all about values.
Our guest is Neil Malhotra from the Stanford Graduate School of Business.
Changing the incentives via regulation are what you can do, not just tell people to do the right thing, because people are always going to convince themselves they're doing the right thing.
Is money the root of anything good?
Money and morality. Coming up on Philosophy Talk.
After the news.
Welcome to Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything.
Except your intelligence. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Today, Philosophy Talk is on the road. We're recording the program in front of a live audience at the classic Residence by Hyatt in Palo Alto, California.
Our thinking originates at Philosopher's Corner on a lovely Stanford campus.
Today's program is made possible in part with support from the Stanford Humanities Center.
We're very pleased to meet some of our listeners here at the Hyatt residence, up close and personal. Folks, welcome to Philosophy Talk. Our topic today, money and morality.
John, I know they say that money is the root of all evil, but what do money and morality really have to do with each other? I mean, philosophically speaking.
Where have you been lately, Ken? In a philosophical cocoon?
What do you mean by that remark, John?
Well, take a look around you. All hell has broken loose. We've lost our moral compass. We've succumbed to the excesses of an anything-goes capitalism.
And anything goes capitalism, huh? You mean like...
Puts the almighty dollar ahead of everything else, including morality, and now we're suffering the consequences.
I take it you're suggesting that the recent financial meltdown was due to, in part, and maybe in large part, to immoral behavior rather than to just colossally bad business decisions? I mean, even though that sounds nice to a philosopher's ears, because that would give us philosophers something to talk about, I'm not sure I agree with you. I think it was bad business decisions mostly.
Yeah, but that is what I'm suggesting, Ken. I mean, don't get me wrong, it took a lot of bad business decisions to get us into this mess, but I also think that a lot went out of whack morally, too. And that kind of behavior has been going on here in America for a long time.
Tell me, what do you have in mind? What do you mean?
Well, start with the whole notion of a corporation. I think that's a root of a lot of the problem. A corporation's supposed to be a person. They're treated like a person. They can go bankrupt and get out of their debts, but they're really not people. They're a strange sort of halfway people. They're really devices to insulate people from the actual effects of their own decisions.
Well, I mean, I guess if you think about it that way, I mean, metaphysically, certainly corporations are strange. I mean, I'm kind of a Lockean about personhood, and here's what Locke said about persons. A person is a thinking, intelligent being that has reason and reflection and can consider itself as itself, the same thinking thing in different times and different places. That's a lot to unpack, but I don't think any of it applies to corporations, so it's metaphysically bizarre to call corporations persons.
Well, it's metaphysically bizarre, but I think the real problem is the moral problem, the problem of responsibility. I mean, Donald Trump sets up a corporation, a lot of people put down payments on homes, then it goes bankrupt. He doesn't lose, he loses whatever money he put in the corporation. He goes off scot-free, happens to him about once a month. Nobody pays the moral bill. Where is it? Who are corporations really responsible to?
Well, under the law, the corporation has a fiduciary responsibility only to its shareholders. That answers your question right there, doesn't it?
Well, what kind of person is that just has responsibility to its shareholders? I mean, what does that even mean? What about all the other people in the world that this, quote, person interacts with? The consumers, the taxpayers, the disinterested third parties whose environment could be ruined or whose economy could be run into the ground by these corporations. Shouldn't they be responsible to the whole community?
Well, I guess what you're saying is that if a corporation really is a person, then we should treat it like a person, like a real person. I mean, we treat real persons like full moral agents. They have to own up to the consequences of all their acts. But we don't really do that to corporations. In certain domains, we kind of let them off the hook.
Oh, we definitely let them off the hook and let the people that run them off the hook. I mean, imagine a person moved next door to you and dumped a lot of chemicals in the air you breathed and the water you drank, did things that caused your job and your whole way of life to be lost, took all your retirement savings away, and in the process got fabulously wealthy himself. How would you feel about such a neighbor?
Well, not too good, I have to admit.
But in the name of the almighty dollar, corporations do that sort of thing to us all the time, and we entitle them to.
Well, that's because we think the discipline of the free market will somehow rein corporations, as you know, Adam Smith's invisible hand and all that. And we think that by pursuing profit and shareholder value in an open, competitive market, that eventually everybody will benefit. Don't you think that's right?
No, it's a fairy tale. It's ideology. It's a little bit of empirical insight mixed into some kind of quasi-religious bunch of bunkum. It's a flawed theory.
Okay.
I reject it. It's no good.
Okay, John. So get off your high horse and tell me how you think we can make corporations act more like full moral agents, while at the same time, having them serve as the main drivers of economic prosperity. How are you going to do that?
Suggesting solutions is above my pay grade. But we're going to be joined by someone who can do a much better job than I could. That's Neil Malhotra. He teaches business ethics here at Stanford University, and he's going to join us in a little bit.
And we hope to be joined by this wonderful audience here at the Classic Residence by Hyatt. We'll ask them for their comments and questions as part of the discussion as well.
But first, our roving philosophical reporter, Rena Palta, meets a man who deals with money and morality every day. She files this report.
The film classic It's a Wonderful Life is about George Bailey, a building and loan association owner who finds himself contemplating suicide. In this scene, the slumlord villain, Mr. Potter, berates him for making a subprime loan.
I happen to know the bank turned down this loan, but he comes here and we're building him a house worth $5,000. Why?
Well, I handled that, Mr. Potter. You have all the papers there, his salary, insurance. I can personally vouch for his character.
Bailey knows the guy who borrowed the money, and he trusts him to pay back the loan. Bailey's funded a whole town's worth of homes the same way.
He's explaining it's a building society. He knows every single person that's borrowed, and all the borrowers know him, and it's a very touching movie.
That's Paul Perez, a managing director with Northern Trust. He says that in George Bailey's world, credit was a rather simple matter. Nowadays, a home mortgage like Ernie's isn't owned by a family loan shop down the road. Maybe half of it belongs to a town in Germany and the other half to a bank in Zimbabwe. But our current system is still based on trust.
At least 50%, and some would argue 80 or 90% of all transactions that go between banks are based on the trust of that other bank, that they can pay, that they can be there to honor their obligation. And that is what was deeply affected, and we began to see become a crisis in about August of 2007.
The mortgage crisis of the last few years happened when a large number of subprime loans in this new environment went bad.
Banks did not know what the other banks had on their balance sheet and weren't about to lend them first longer-term money, and eventually it went to they wouldn't lend them money overnight. One of the ways to describe it is a crisis of trust.
The result is a society where credit is scarce. Back to the movie. It's a Wonderful Life deals with this issue when George Bailey's guardian angel shows him what the world would be like if he were never born.
Hey, where'd the building and loan move to?
Building and what?
The Bailey building and loan was up there.
They went out of business years ago.
There's no building and loan, no source of credit, no trust. The town is run by the nasty slumlord Mr. Potter. Everyone's his tenant because there's nowhere to get a loan. The downtown is a smattering of strip joints, pawn shops, and cranky townspeople.
Strange, isn't it? Each man's life touches so many other lives. And when he isn't around, he leaves an awful hole, doesn't he?
Paul Perez says the subprime mortgage crisis should leave us with the same lesson, that morality and a healthy economy are mutually dependent.
In chaos theory, they say that a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil can create a hurricane in Southeast Asia.
Or a mortgage agent not putting their client first, or a borrower fudging their mortgage application.
That had, as we come to see, multi-trillion-dollar generational affecting results. So on a micro level, our moral behavior does indeed matter.
For Philosophy Talk, I'm Rena Palta.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk, coming to you from the classic Residence by Hyatt in Palo Alto, California. I'm John Perry, along with Ken Taylor.
And we're joined now by Neil Malhotra. He's a professor of political economy at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, where he teaches courses on, among other things, business ethics. Neil, welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Thanks for having me.
Neil, you teach business ethics to business students, people who will eventually go on to become major movers and shakers in corporate America. I don't want to sound overly cynical, but doesn't the average Stanford business student tend to regard business ethics as sort of window dressing?
Well, I think that's a fair question. Stanford is the most selective business school in the world, and I think the students come into it with a very broad and open mind. That being said, I think two things make them really buy into the class. The first is the fact that they understand that you can't divorce ethics from corporate strategy, that to have a lot of profits, that you have to have ethical people in your organization and not bringing it down. And second, and I think that's interesting as well, is that they understand that ethics is not just about philosophy, but touches on various social scientific topics as well, which interests them.
But I assume, in addition to these noble motives, it's also required.
That is true. There is a selection problem on both sides, whereas I'm required to teach it and they're required to take it.
And for a degree, how many units are required and how many units of business ethics are required?
So the degree takes over 100 units, and business ethics is 2 units, or less than 2%.
Yeah, well, that may not be the students requiring it as window dressing, but the faculty or the faculty jointly. I don't know if you'd say window dressing, but 2 units out of 100, that seems too small, given how highly consequential but ethical situations can be.
Well, one thing we teach them in the class is that even though you have 2 units of your experience talking about ethics directly, that in each of your classes, whether it be accounting, finance, marketing, you should push the professor and ask ethical questions, so it's much more than 2%.
Good for you. Okay, so we've got you in the classroom with these students, no matter what drew them to the classroom. Now, what do you tell them? How do you tell them to deal with cases when business imperatives, make a profit, make the shareholders glad you're there, and moral imperatives clash?
And you said good business decisions require ethical decision-making, but surely you'll agree that there's sometimes when the imperatives of morality and the imperatives of the market just are out of sync, right?
That's true, and I think one thing we impress upon them is that oftentimes you do not necessarily do well by doing good. That's sort of the simple solution to the problem, because markets don't solve all the problems, and institutions can't solve all the problems. And so we oftentimes discuss it on a case-by-case basis, where the ethical answer, if it's interesting, is not simple. So for example, in subprime lending, on the one hand, subprime lending is considered an abhorrent practice where you're taking advantage of poor people. In another case, subprime lending, also called microfinance, won somebody a Nobel Prize.
Right.
For peace. So I just think they're hard topics, and using philosophy and psychology to think about these problems analytically, I think helps them out.
Help me think about this more, about the moral dimensions of something like subprime lending. To a person who is not a great credit risk, I take it, right? So it seems like you could look at that as a kind of Ponzi scheme, right? Yeah, I'm going to lend you this money. You're not going to be able to pay it back. You're going to have to go into bankruptcy. I'm screwing my shareholders, but I'm going to bundle this and sell it off to somebody else, and it's not going to be my problem, right? I mean, you could look at it like that.
It's a little more complicated than that, because I think when people thought they couldn't pay back the loan, that they would just sell the house for more than they bought it for, and they'd end up with a 10% profit on a real estate investment. So the responsibility could be diffused very easily without anybody actually thinking that they were doing anything wrong.
I mean, subprime lending in and of itself seems like a good thing. When I was an assistant professor at UCLA and Governor Reagan was governor, paying me about $8,000 a year, I managed to buy a house, and I had to pay a little more than the prime rate because I was not exactly, God's gift to a good credit risk. But still, it worked fine. The problem is this abuse. Now, you've got students, or you can imagine students in a position, someone who used to be a student is in a position where he sees people actually abusing this subprime lending, using these devices and making a lot of money and ending up on Wall Street while he's still sticking to his only give to reasonable credit risks, and he's stuck in his bank in Walla Walla, Washington, or Petaluma, or wherever. How does a person deal with that? Deal with the fact that immoral people often get ahead in business?
Well, one thing we talk about is that if you're at the top, you have to incentivize people to do the right thing. So one of the problems with subprime lending is that a lot of mortgage brokers, et cetera, were incentivized by getting extra bonuses the more loans they originated. And I think that creates, although good economic incentives, bad moral incentives.
This is a special edition of Philosophy Talk, coming to you from the Classic Residence by Hyatt in Palo Alto, California. We're talking about money and morality with Neil Malhotra from Stanford University.
We've been talking about the ethical education of future business leaders and whether it's possible to reconcile the imperatives of the market and the imperatives of morality. Coming up, we'll look at the nature of corporations as moral agents. Should corporations only be beholden to their shareholders, or should they be beholden to the public good?
Corporations as moral agents, along with questions and comments from our live audience when Philosophy Talk continues.
You moan and you go quite a lot. You can take it on the chin, call a cab and begin to recover on your 14-carat yacht. What? Money makes the world go round.
Money and morality. That's our topic today. I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. And this is Philosophy Talk. To whom should a corporation be ultimately responsible? To its shareholders? To consumers and taxpayers? Or to anyone who might be materially affected by its action? Is a corporation really and truly a person, or is the idea of a corporation as a person a mere fiction?
Tell us what you think. We're in Palo Alto in front of a live audience. Raise your hand and Devin or Rena will come by with a microphone. Our guest is Neil Malhotra from Stanford University.
Neil, as if we didn't need proof, didn't need more proof, the ongoing financial crisis shows how thoroughly the behavior of corporations can affect us all, for good or for ill, but in the current case, for ill. Now, under the laws, as I understand it, corporations are required to act in the best interest of their shareholders, but there's nothing in the law that says they have to act in the best interest of society at large, of consumers, taxpayers, and just third party. I mean, is that the way it ought to be?
I mean, on one hand, shareholders own the company, but the way other countries manage corporate governance, they really believe in the stakeholder model, and I think that's the right way to do it.
What do you mean by that?
The stakeholder model says that just because, even if you don't own a company, the company is still responsible to you. So for example, if you're an employee of the company, if you're a customer, if you're somebody that lives next door to a plant that pollutes, for example, in the river near where you live, that the corporation is responsible to your interest, welfare, utility.
Well, that sounds cool to me. That sounds right to me, because obviously when things go badly for us all, when corporations make mistakes or bad decisions, they can affect us all. But why do we have this different model in the U.S.? I mean, is there some justification? I'm sure there are historical reasons, but is there a philosophical justification behind it?
I mean, I don't know about philosophically. In other countries, because they're more family-owned businesses, they tend to have different structures of corporate governance, whereas the U.S., we don't have families controlling corporations and whatnot.
I took a rather cynical line towards corporations in our opening segment. That's not really my true view. I grew up in Nebraska, Lincoln, Nebraska. My father was a lawyer and a banker, and it seemed to me there were a lot of good corporations that you didn't need to legislate this stakeholder stuff because it came naturally. If you're, in charge of Cushman Motor Works or my uncle's lumber yard, you naturally don't just think about your shareholders, who are usually fairly small and known to you, but also your customers. But a lot of the problem seems to me to come from these huge corporations we have, multinational corporations. When I was a kid, you couldn't have a bank that crossed state lines. Now we have these multinational banks where the decision-making and the people that do the decision-making and the people that are affected by it don't have, and this came up in the Roe Philosophical Reporter interview, don't have a personal relationship, where the borrower and the lender end up being galaxies apart. Is somehow our our picture of the corporation as embodied in U.S. law fails to keep up with the expanding and international nature of corporations?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And just two things to build on that. One, as corporations expand to international areas, they don't have the institutions that the U.S. actually has to guide corporations in the right direction. So one example of that is strict liability and tort, which guides corporations to make safe products, incentivizes them to do so. And second, I think what makes the shareholder model especially dangerous is not that only the owners of the corporations have a stake, but that they demand good earnings every quarter. So the problem with that is that it incentivizes corporations to do what's good in the short term and not look for the long-term health of the society and the economy, and it leads to a problem of instant gratification.
Why would that? Why would that incentivize? I don't quite understand. I'm not a business guy, but I don't quite understand why would the stake shareholder model of responsibility incentivize short-term thinking? Is that because the shareholders are only in it for the short term? They buy and dump stocks at the blink of an eye? Is that?
Well, the CEO's job health is really dependent on what the stock price of the company is. And the stock price of the company is highly sensitive to earnings per share, which are reported every quarter. And so as a result, you have to do something that's going to benefit the corporation in that quarter, like issue a lot of subprime loans, et cetera, as opposed to what might help the corporation and the society 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 100 years from now.
But now, to the extent that the corporation stock is owned by a small number of people who intend to keep it for a long time, they won't have this pressure for short-term return. So in a way, this is the effect of what in many ways has been a good thing, this tremendous ownership of stock and indirect ownership of stock through mutual funds, so that there's all this competition for this huge surge of money that doesn't come from people who have a natural family or long-term interest in the corporation. How do we buffer the corporate decision makers from that kind of influence?
I think that's actually problematic. So because financial services are just so flexible and fluid now, you can easily, for example, move your money out of one mutual fund to another. So if that mutual fund doesn't perform well in that quarter or in that annual year, it's very easy now to switch your money in and out.
So it's really us that's the problem.
I think that's true. I mean, and the incentive structure, I think.
So let me ask you a question. This model, I forget the fancy name you use for it.
Stakeholder model.
So we have the stakeholder model, but in European countries, there's a different model.
Well, so we have a shareholder model, which is the owners of the corporation. They're the ones you're responsible to. And in other countries, that is not just if you own the company, but if you're affected by the company.
Right, if you're affected by the company. So let me ask you, is corporate decision-making radically different under these two different regimes? I mean, is it a more... So we think of corporations as persons. We think of persons as moral agents. So by logic, corporations are moral agents, but we don't quite hold them to the same standards as we do you and me and everybody else. We don't quite hold them in a model where it's the stakeholders and not the shareholders, anybody affected. Are corporations fuller moral agents in such an environment?
Well, correlation does not imply causality, but you oftentimes see European corporations having less environmental adverse impacts, having less product safety problems, et cetera. At the same time, Europe has a lot slower economic growth. And I think it's a trade-off of distribution of, some people are going to have to pay for high economic growth, and how do you divide the spoils? And that's a moral, fundamental, philosophical question.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're talking about money and morality with our guest, Neil Malhotra from Stanford University, who teaches business ethics, and we'd love to have questions from our live audience. So if you have questions, folks, come up, put up a hand, and Devin or Rena will come around with the microphone.
I just want to make a point, ask a question about responsibility. I mean, it's great to say corporations are persons. In a way, they're a device that shields people from personal bankruptcy when their business goes bust. We've seen great benefits of that in Silicon Valley. We have lots of very successful people who've done wonderful things for society, for their employees, for the technological universe after 3 or 4 bankruptcies. So there's clearly a plus side of that. But still, there's something weird about it, because corporations can't really be people. They can't suffer. When a corporation goes bankrupt, it disappears. It doesn't move somewhere and feel bad for the rest of its life about being a failed corporation. So how do you hold corporations responsible? Doesn't it really come down to holding people responsible?
And I think the markets can do that in some ways. So if a CEO does, for example, the CEO of Countrywide is going to have a hard time finding another CEO position. I think that that's not really the problem. I think the much bigger problem is the problem of that you have to meet it at the 1 quarter, 2 quarter mark, not the 5-year mark.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're discussing money and morality with Neil Malhotra from Stanford University. And we've got a question from our live audience over here. Welcome to Philosophy Talk.
Yes, there are 2 questions I would like to ask. If a young couple takes out a loan on their home, which they can pay, and which they continue to pay, shouldn't a bank really, or does a bank notify them that their loan is no longer with the bank where they think it is, that it's been sold off wherever? That's one question. The other is, it seems to me at any rate that credit card companies that allow people to run up really quite high balances, which they are not really required to pay off. I mean, if someone isn't paying their credit card balance each month or some plan where they're paying so much per month, isn't it obvious that they're over their heads? And is it any responsibility of the credit card company at all to, are we such a free society that you can say, well, it's your own problem if you're going to carry $20,000, $25,000 on your credit card every month and pay a high interest?
So 2 questions. The first one's kind of factual. Don't banks have to tell their borrowers who they've sold their mortgage to? And how do they even do that in the modern world?
No, they don't, especially if it's going to eventually be securitized. The banks sell bundles of mortgages to the investment banks that eventually sell them on the market. And it's led to a huge problem when we now have to renegotiate these mortgage rates. And we don't know who we're supposed to be renegotiating with. And obviously this is a place where government regulation a priori would have done wonders. And the second point is on the credit cards is, credit cards companies don't do well when people default on their credit card balances. They lose a lot of money off that. The people they make a good amount of money off are people called revolvers. So these are people who don't pay back the full amount every month, but then are accruing interest slowly, but then they aren't going to default on their accounts. And I think that's an open philosophical question. The idea that you get to loan money for interest, I don't think is an inherently immoral thing.
No, it raises an interesting question. So you like to think that consumers are autonomous, self-governing agents with some responsibilities to inform themselves. And you don't like to think of corporations as in the paternalistic business. You can't really afford this. This is really a bad deal, so don't take this deal. That would be an odd thing for a corporation to turn into a kind of haranguing nanny, wouldn't you think?
But the corporations already do that. So this is essentially what strict liability and tort is all about, which is the reason you have silly warning labels and safety labels on all the products is because in the United States, you don't have to prove negligence that the company did. All you have to prove is that the product was defective in some way and that the use of it, a normal person could have been harmed by it. So we actually are kind of in the nanny state because of the way the legal system is set up. Right.
We have a question on this side of the room.
First, just an observation, and then my question. We seem to be putting the individual versus the corporation, and there was a reference in the beginning to Adam Smith and his free hand. If I recall correctly, Adam Smith is viewed as kind of the father of economics, but I believe he was a philosopher, and he also put the free hand in the context of the greater moral good and the assumption at that particular time that people would be operating with a greater moral good, values compass, if you will, that was throughout the society. I think in our current time, it's really not just the individual and the corporation. I think if we look at our society and what the greater moral good, what that compass value compass is, I think it's been put in somebody's pocket, because it's not just the corporations that I think that have strayed. I think if we look at the regulators, where was the SEC? Where were the other regulators? Where was our congressional banking committee? Why weren't they, or finance, the committees in Congress that were responsible for the financial community? Where were they? Why weren't they doing their oversight? Where were the business schools in their instruction? 2% of ethics, I don't think, is very much today to be given what we've seen of the history of the last couple of years.
I think you're onto something. I mean, there's a lot of blame to go around. I just want to make a remark about Adam Smith. Not only was he the father of economics, The Wealth of Nations, but he also wrote a book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which is one of the great treatises in moral philosophy in the history of philosophy. And they should be read together. But I don't think they teach the other one in business school.
No, I don't think so. Well, I just have one thing on that point, is that when you lead up to this subprime crisis, everybody was on the same side. The Democrats, the Republicans, the people in the executive branch, legislative branch, they wanted this to go on, to make it easy to buy a home, easy to get credit, because everybody was helped by it. The builders, the people who put the granite countertops in, the mortgage brokers, the real estate agents. So that's why I always say, when something is very bipartisan, be very scared. Because that means everybody is not looking out for something that something is wrong when everybody supports something and that there isn't any trade-off.
You're listening.
It's wisdom you can take away with you.
You're listening to Philosophy Talk. We're discussing money and morality with Neil Malhotra from Stanford University.
In our final segment, we'll ask what, if anything, the government should do to rein in corporations, and what, if anything, an individual can do to protect him or herself from being taken in by corporations.
We're coming to you from the Classics Residence by Hyatt in Palo Alto, California. We'll answer more questions from our live audience when Philosophy Talk continues.
Why don't you do right like some other men do? Get out of here and get me some money too.
Should there be limits on how people get money? We're discussing money and morality with Neil Malhotra from Stanford University. I'm John Perry, and this is Philosophy Talk, the program that questions everything
except your intelligence. And I'm Ken Taylor. We've got lots of questions from our live audience. So why don't you, in the back of the room, tell us who you are and where you're from, and then give us your comment or question.
My name is Jerry Seelig, and I'm a resident here. I'd like to make a comment, and I'd like to address very quickly what I think is a long-term secular trend. And the trend is away from the Adam Smith totally free market. We're moving slowly, erratically, in the direction of more and more government regulations, EPA, OSHA, and so on. So it may not be the corporation that is becoming necessarily more moral, but I believe society, through its government and through the various legislations that we're seeing over a period of time, particularly after gross negligence and scandals and so on, that stimulates various types of legislation, that we're seeing a long-term movement toward what was referred to as stakeholder responsibility as opposed to just stockholder responsibility. I happen to personally believe that that's the right direction to go.
What do you think, Neil?
No, I think that's a good point. Just to sort of go beyond that is that I oftentimes ask my students that if you're designing a product and you have to set a safety standard and you've met exactly what the OSHA standards are, what the FDA standards are, and still some more people are going to die, then do you make it more safe? And I think the questions that are interesting to business people are, even when the regulations aren't enough, do you still do something on top of that? And that's a difficult ethical question.
But Jerry and Neil, you sound like you want us to move towards becoming like another France. I mean, it sounds like socialism to me. I mean, we're gonna end up with month-paid vacations and medical care that you don't need to worry about, and a whole host of terrible things if we go that direction.
Well, I think you can definitely have regulation without being socialist. And also, there's a concept of varieties of capitalism, that capitalism doesn't have to look in one particular way or one particular shade of color. So, for example, Scandinavian countries have boosted a lot of innovation in entrepreneurship and they have very high government involvement in their economy. So there's not one way to do it.
And moreover, I like to say one of the great inventions of the 20th century, I believe, was the mixed economy, right? Didn't capitalism, global capitalism, like collapse back in 1929? And then the thing that many people believe saved it was the invention of the mixed economy, which, I don't know, we're just talking about a slightly more mixed economy, shifting the mixture. But we've got a lot of questions from our live audience. Where is the next? There. Tell us your name and where you're from, and then your comment.
My name is Ruth Miller, and I'm from the Hyatt. I have a what-if question for you. What if a firm decided to operate on a purely moral basis? Now, what do you think would be the difference in their profit margins if they, instead of they're operating on the basis they now operate, which I'm not insinuating, I'm stating I believe they do not? And how is it possible for a society to balance these two, to have a combination that is beneficial to the most and harmful to the least?
Excellent question.
Let me just throw in a little evidence. In my CREF, I have that's my savings for retirement. I'm now retired, but I haven't started drawing on it. It's divided between the responsible social mutual fund and it doesn't call itself the irresponsible anti-social mutual fund, but the responsible one doesn't do quite as well.
Right. I think it's the bottom-up trickling that has to go, that people have to demand of the corporations as consumers, as investors, as employees, that they look out for stakeholders beyond the people who are the owners of the corporation. So an empirical piece of evidence, and this is not causal, is that companies that have corporate social responsibilities programs tend to do better in terms of their bottom line and profitability. Now, that could be because only the really strong companies do the corporate social responsibility in the first place, but it could also be that the market is beginning to demand this sort of stuff and reward companies for doing these sort of actions.
But you made a contrast between Europe and the U.S., which people frequently make. I mean, until recently, we have a much more dynamic economy than the European economies. I mean, there's much more innovation, there's much more growth, less unemployment. And you look at the structure of Europe versus the structure of the U.S., and it looks like we've made two different decisions in terms of trade-offs. They decided for more social safety net, social well-being, social goods. We've decided for more energy and innovation, right? And there's a trade-off. Now, I don't know who's to say whether it might be that morality demands things of us that we aren't prepared to pay as a society. We'll get less moral goods, less community, but for more dynamism. Or it might be that we make the European decision. I mean, aren't these kind of like equally rational ways of being, and it's just what you value or something like that?
Yeah, it's all about values. Do you think that the way John Rawls views the world, that if you were randomly assigned to some position in society, that's how you should set up society? Or are you a utilitarianism, that the aggregate good and utility of society was what matters? And those are questions of values.
But there seems to be one thing that, I'm particularly thinking about California here. We really want to get things on the cheap. We don't want to pay taxes. I mean, I know people in California think the taxes are high, but they're clearly not high enough to pay the bills. And it seems impossible to convince people that we have to actually pay as we go, or at least tax as we go.
That's true. I mean, when you look at public opinion polls, there are two facts that always come about, that people want lower taxes and more services. And there's no way both of these things can happen. And
Right.
the problem is that the government has an incentive to give people both of these things for votes, and that causes the government to run out of money.
So we've got one more question in the back of the room there. Tell us who you are and then give us your comment or question.
Gene Selwachter, and I live here also. The word honesty hasn't come up, and I'm amazed, because if it isn't an honest investment, then it has no base. It's not solid. And the thing with the homes as an example, the people that were going out and pushing these mortgages would tell the person, well, don't worry about how much money you have. They never put out an internal revenue report from the previous year to document anything. Neither side did. Just make up something. And maybe it doesn't matter because it's going to appreciate. So the person makes up a figure. The bank doesn't check on it. The bank looks upon it's going to be an appreciation type thing, and it's going to be something that we'll get them on the interest, and we'll do up front, no payments to make until a certain time, and then when these payments will start to kick in. All of these things are gimmicks. It isn't based on honesty. It's not based on a decent morality.
No.
And so if you don't have the base, it's ridiculous.
There's a lot there, and I want to go back to the honesty thing. I just want to go back to the honesty thing, because I think most actors and corporations and most citizens are people of goodwill, and they were doing what they believed but now I do think they were way off in their assessments of risk and reward, way off. And it's a major puzzle of why we were so way off in our assessments of risk and reward. So that's another thing. It's not as though the economy is full of sort of maximally rational, maximally informed actors. It's full of schmucky human beings like us, right? And that's a large part of the problem, that we get things wrong in all kinds of ways.
That is 1,000% right, and it actually makes the question much more pernicious, because most people are good, honest people, but the problem is that most people convince themselves that they're doing the right thing. And if you go back to the Enron scandal of 5 years ago, the big problem was not that these accountants were evil, immoral people, is that they were so tied to the corporations they were auditing that they convinced themselves that the accounting decisions they were making were the right moral decisions, which is a much more tougher problem than telling people to be honest.
Right, so what do we do? What do you teach them in business ethics? I'm not quite sure it's a business ethics problem. What do you do with this situation, with these flawed people that we are making these consequential decisions?
I think it's up to you and your 2 units out of 100 to change the course of history here. What are you going to tell them?
So, I think that, government, regulations, both by government and at the top of the corporation, have to guide people's behavior in the right direction. So with the accounting case, the Sarbanes-Oxley bill was a joke, because all it did was say to the CEO, you have to sign the accounting statement. And remember, CEOs are going to convince themselves that the accounting books are right, and they're going to sign it. The big thing that had to be done is that you have to tell the accounting firm you can't work for the same client twice in 5 years. And that's going to allow you to not be so invested with making sure the books are cooked, because you're not going to be able to get the business again for 5 years. So changing the incentives via regulation are what you can have to do, not just tell people to do the right thing, because people are always going to convince themselves they're doing the right thing.
Neil, on that note, I'm going to thank you for joining us. It's been a really stimulating conversation.
Thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
All right. Our guest has been Neil Malhotra. He's professor of political economy at the Stanford Graduate School of Business.
We also want to thank everyone in our live audience for participating in the program. Give yourselves a big round of applause.
So, John, are you wiser today? Did you learn anything today?
Oh, I'm working on a thought. It seems to me there's some paradox that hasn't quite been formulated at the bottom of all this. When you spread the risk, like insurance does, there's something in there that kind of cuts down on the honesty, or cuts down on the personal responsibility. And so it's a very good thing to spread the risk, but it has a downside. I don't think we've quite figured out how to deal with that.
Right, because aggregating the risk over everybody, right, makes it harder for anybody. Any individual decision maker doesn't have nearly as much risk so these little decisions.
Not as much risk.
The risk is still out there. The amount of risk is still out there. But any individual decision maker only has a little bit of the risk, and they make a decision based on their little bit of the risk, and so they can. I think you're right. I think that's a cool thought. Maybe we should write a paper about that together.
I'm very glad my house is insured, and that if it burns down, I don't have to take the whole thing on the chin. But I must admit, if it wasn't insured, I would probably work harder to keep it safe and sound. So there's somehow we need to figure that out. You need to figure that out. and I'll co-sign.
Well, that's really interesting, John. But this conversation continues, as always, on our blog, the blog.philosophytalk.org, where our motto is cogito ergo blogo. I think, therefore I blog.
And you can download podcasts of our program from our website as well. But for the final word on money and morality, we turn to Ian Scholes, the 60-second philosopher.
Ian Scholes. The first corporations were boroughs, guilds, and monasteries intended for social cohesion, not personal gain. One of the first corporate corporations was the East India Trading Company, merchants united to facilitate trade in the Indies, but it existed at the whim of the British government. Early America was more concerned with those iron whims of kings and queens and the dangers of corporations, but as industrialism bloomed, so did business. Then, in 1886, the Supreme Court extended the protection of the 14th Amendment, intended to secure the rights of newly free black men of free speech or protection from search and seizure, to corporations, which were now legally people under the law. Milton Friedman wrote in 1970, "There is one and only one social responsibility of business, to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase its profits." Well, that could be bad, except business is also supposedly run by what proto-economist Adam Smith called the invisible hand, which self-regulates the marketplace. Making a lot of money, nothing bad will come of it, sounds like a win-win. Hence, the depression aside, American view of business has remained by and large positive. Until Exxon Valdez and Martha Stewart and lead paint and toys, and the fall of Enron and Bernie Madoff and the housing collapse and the credit crunch, and we all started to feel a bit slapped around by the invisible corporate hand of these fictitious persons. In 1984, a book appeared by R. Edward Freeman called Strategic Management, a Stakeholder Approach. Freeman made the case that besides shareholders, consideration should also be given to stakeholders, that is, shareholders themselves, but also consumers, governments, unions, special interest groups, anyone, in short, affected by a corporation's doings. This has proved problematic. A bureaucrat in a foreign country could be a stakeholder. What he wants is a bribe. An animal rights activist could be a stakeholder. What she wants is for the corporation to stop testing on animals, whether the corporation tests animals or not. So who gets what? And what about the rest of us? Many are thrilled with our new cell phone. They came to us courtesy of a mighty corporation. Others hate that we're subjected to the loud yakking of strangers when we're trying to read a newspaper on the bus. Some still love big damn cars. Others get less space on the road, get crashed into by the things, and have to spend longer time at the gas station as the things suck up all available petroleum in a tri-county area. What are the limits of production? Who decides who doesn't get what? Can we trust the wisdom of the marketplace? In 2004, a Canadian documentary, The Corporation, was released. It asked the question, if a corporation is a legal person, what kind of person is it? Using the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, one expert in the movie concluded that the corporation was a psychopath. Now, that's a bit harsh, yet the corporation does exude considerable charm. It has people who can create charm for it. A soothing tone of voice, the voicing of a need that we didn't even know we had, the promise to fill that need. But the old glad-handing doesn't quite work anymore. It's inevitable with any long-term relationship, I suppose. The corporation makes all this money and doesn't share any of it with me. Corporation flies all over the world, but leaves me at home with the dirty dishes. The corporation said it would pay for my insurance, but now I'm broke in the hospital, and the corporation has taken up with a floozy, half its age. Corporation said we'd be together forever. Now I'm left alone with that pink slip and bitter memories. Corporation, you've vanished into thin air. The trust is just not there. But let's not get divorced quite yet. Let's give a trial separation a shot. And this time maybe keep the Supreme Court out of it. Sounds more like a case for Judge Judy to me. I gotta go.
Philosophy Talk is a presentation of Ben Manila Productions and the trustees of Leland Stanford Junior University, copyright 2009.
Our executive producer is David Demarest.
Special thanks to Susan Spiller, Gene Doble, and the staff of the classic Residence by Hyatt, Palo Alto.
Also to Susan Sebert, Zoe Bauer, and Aaron Rodriguez.
And thanks to Isaac Weiser, Rena Palta, Jennifer Jensen, and Corey Goldman.
Our production coordinator is Devin Strolovich. Daniel Elstein and Cole Leahy are our directors of research. Leo Weiss is our webmaster.
Support for Philosophy Talk comes from the Stanford Humanities Center, various groups at Stanford University, the Friends of Philosophy Talk, and from the Templeton Foundation.
And from the members of KALW Local Public Radio, San Francisco, where our program originates.
The views expressed or misexpressed on this program do not necessarily represent the opinions of Stanford University or of our other funders.
The conversation continues on our website, philosophytalk.org.
I'm John Perry.
And I'm Ken Taylor. Thank you for listening.
And thank you for thinking.
Thank you.